Shut down the range! Colonel Elias Ward's command cracked across Fort Redstone so sharply that even the horses seemed to hold their breath. A moment earlier, the training field had been alive with pounding hooves, shouted times, and the metallic rattle of obstacle gates shifting in the dry Colorado wind. Now there was only silence. At the center of the course, Claire Whitaker sat upright on a dark chestnut Mustang named Dakota, one hand resting lightly against his neck. They had just cleared the final barrier when a bent steel hook caught the fabric of her field jacket. The sleeve tore from elbow to shoulder with a sound no louder than paper ripping, but what appeared beneath it silenced nearly 80 soldiers, trainers, and observers. On Claire's upper arm was a faded symbol, a black horseshoe divided by a narrow silver wing, with the letters GS7 marked beneath it. She covered it almost immediately, pulling the torn cloth across her skin, but Colonel Ward had already seen enough. His binoculars slipped from his hand and struck the wooden platform at his feet. He did not look surprised. He looked as though a name buried for years had just spoken from the ground. Sergeant Mason Reed lowered his stopwatch. Only minutes earlier, he had been smiling at Claire's slow approach to the course, certain that the quiet civilian and her scarred Mustang would fail before the first turn. Now his expression had emptied. Dakota shifted once beneath Claire, not nervous, only watchful. His ears turned toward Ward as the colonel descended the observation steps. Claire did not reach for the reins. She barely moved 2 fingers against Dakota's mane, and the Mustang became still. That small response drew more attention than any command could have. Ward crossed nearly 40 yards of packed dirt without taking his eyes from the mark on her arm. The young trainees followed him with their gaze, unsure why the senior officer's face had gone pale. Dust moved across the range in thin ribbons. Somewhere beyond the fencing, a loose chain tapped softly against a post. When Ward stopped beside Dakota, he looked first at Claire, then at the old scar along the Mustang's left shoulder. Recognition deepened in his eyes. "Where did you get that symbol?" he asked. Claire's voice remained calm. "A long time ago." Ward studied her for another second. "That is not an answer. It is the only one I have." No one on the range had heard a civilian speak to him that way, yet there was no challenge in her tone, only distance. Ward lowered his voice until those nearest had to lean forward. "Ghost Spur 7 disappeared 12 years ago." Claire's hand tightened once in Dakota's mane. The Mustang released a slow breath, warm against the cold morning air. Ward looked at them both and whispered, "No one was supposed to come back." 36 hours earlier, the same people now staring in silence had watched Claire arrive with an old horse trailer and called her the stable girl. 36 hours earlier, Claire Whitaker guided an aging pickup through the east gate of Fort Redstone just after sunrise, towing a weathered horse trailer that looked out of place beside the polished military transports lined along the fence. The guard checked her civilian credentials twice, then glanced toward the trailer when a steady hoof struck the floor inside. "You are here for the mounted search course?" he asked, unable to hide his doubt. Claire nodded. "That is what the paperwork says." Beyond the gate, the base spread across several miles of open Colorado ground, with low training buildings to the west and a series of timber obstacles climbing toward the foothills. Flags snapped in the cold wind. Horses called from the temporary stables. Claire parked at the far end of the staging area, away from the larger trailers carrying carefully bred quarter horses and warm bloods selected for military demonstrations. When she lowered the ramp, Dakota did not rush out. The dark chestnut Mustang stood in the shadow, watching the unfamiliar field with quiet, amber eyes. A pale scar crossed his left shoulder beneath the edge of his mane. Claire waited without pulling the lead rope. After several seconds, Dakota stepped onto the ramp, tested it once, and descended with measured confidence. Their arrival drew immediate attention. Sergeant Mason Reed stood near the registration table with a clipboard tucked beneath one arm. He was broad-shouldered, sharply dressed, and known for running the course by the stopwatch. His gaze moved from Claire's plain field jacket to Dakota's worn leather halter. "Support staff checks in behind the barns," he said. Claire handed him her papers. "I am registered for the course." Reed read the first page, then looked at Dakota again. "With that horse?" "His name is Dakota." A few trainees nearby turned to listen. One of them, Tyler Boone, smiled as he tightened the girth on a tall bay gelding. "That is a Mustang," he said. "I thought this was advanced search training, not an adoption event." Laughter moved through the group. Claire did not look at him. She ran one hand along Dakota's neck, feeling the rhythm beneath his coat, then crouched beside his front hoof. Reed tapped his clipboard impatiently. "We have certified mounts here, animals trained for noise, smoke, steep grades, and emergency extraction. Your horse has no current federal service record." Claire lifted Dakota's hoof and found a small stone pressed near the shoe. "He does not need a record to know where he is standing." Reed frowned. "What is that supposed to mean?" She removed the stone, checked the hoof, and set it down gently. "It means he pays attention." Tyler laughed again. "Maybe he can fill out the safety forms, too." Dakota turned one ear toward him but did not move his feet. Claire noticed the gelding beside Tyler shifting its weight away from a loose strap hanging beneath the saddle. She rose and pointed to it. "Your rear cinch is twisted." Tyler glanced down, embarrassed when he saw she was right. He fixed it without thanking her. Reed marked something on his clipboard. "Whitaker, you and the Mustang start in the observation group. No obstacle access until I decide you are ready." Claire accepted the decision without argument. She led Dakota toward the far rail, where the morning sun stretched their shadows across the dirt. Behind them, Tyler muttered, "Stable girl." Claire kept walking, but Dakota slowed for half a step, as if he had heard every word. From the observation rail, Claire watched the first mounted teams enter the lower course, while Dakota stood beside her with one hind leg relaxed. The morning drills began with simple turns, narrow passages, and controlled stops before advancing toward smoke machines and elevated timber ramps. Most riders focused on the obstacles ahead. Claire watched everything around them. She studied the distance between support posts, the direction of the wind, the dark patches where overnight frost had softened the ground, and the way each horse carried its weight before a difficult approach. Dakota seemed to follow the same invisible map. His ears moved toward every command, every loose chain, and every change in the horses around him, but his breathing never quickened. Tyler Boone passed the rail on his bay gelding and called out, "Make sure your Mustang does not fall asleep." A few trainees laughed. Claire rested 2 fingers against Dakota's neck. The horse lifted his head, looked toward the course, and returned to stillness. Sergeant Reed approached with his clipboard. "Observation means paying attention, Whitaker. You have spent 10 minutes staring at the dirt." "The dirt is changing," Claire said. Reed glanced down. "It is dirt. The eastern lane is thawing faster. The third turn will lose traction before noon." Reed looked toward the lane, saw nothing unusual, and moved on without answering. During the next exercise, riders were instructed to guide their horses through a corridor of hanging canvas strips, while recorded engine noise played from speakers. Several horses hesitated. One backed away so quickly that its rider had to circle and begin again. Dakota remained outside the rail, but when the engine recording started, he shifted closer to Claire rather than away from the sound. She did not restrain him. She placed her palm near his shoulder, breathed out once, and the Mustang lowered his head. An older assistant trainer named Walter Hayes noticed. He had spent 20 years working with mounted patrol units and understood how difficult calm could be when it was real. "How long have you had him?" he asked. 9 years. "You train him yourself?" Claire looked at Dakota. "We learned together." Walter watched her guide the Mustang backward, with a slight change in posture and no pressure on the lead rope. "That is not ranch work." Claire gave no reply. Across the course, Tyler entered the eastern lane at a fast trot. His gelding reached the third turn, planted a front hoof, and slipped several inches in the softened soil. Tyler recovered, but the horse came out tense and uneven. Reed stopped the exercise and ordered the lane inspected. A staff member pressed his boot into the ground and sank nearly 2 inches. Reed looked toward Claire at the rail. She was already checking Dakota's saddle straps, as though she had not been watching. "Lucky guess," Tyler said when he rode past her again. Claire adjusted a worn buckle beneath Dakota's chest. "Luck does not usually leave hoof prints." Tyler opened his mouth, then thought better of it. Walter Hayes remained silent, but his eyes stayed on Claire's hands. She checked each strap in the same order, twice, with movements too precise to be casual. When a metal gate slammed unexpectedly behind them, every horse in the nearby line startled except Dakota. He turned toward the sound, placed himself between Claire and the gate, and waited. Claire touched his mane. "Easy," she whispered, though the horse was already calm. Walter looked from Dakota to Claire and understood one thing clearly. They were not learning how to work together. They were remembering. By late morning, the sun had burned through the thin cloud cover, leaving the upper course bright and exposed against the Colorado foothills. Sergeant Reed finally allowed the observation group to walk their horses through the equipment lane, though he made it clear that Claire and Dakota were there only to follow. The route ended at a narrow timber bridge built 6 feet above a shallow training trench. It was designed to test balance, trust, and obedience. One rider crossed without trouble. A second horse hesitated at the entrance, then moved forward after firm pressure from the reins. When Claire approached, Dakota stopped 3 feet from the first plank. Tyler Boone, waiting on the opposite side, leaned forward in his saddle. "There it is," he called. "The famous Mustang courage." Reed raised one hand. "Move him forward, Whitaker." Claire did not pull the lead rope. She watched Dakota's ears turn toward the bridge, then studied the structure herself. The Mustang lowered his nose, took one slow step closer, and stopped again. His attention remained fixed on the right support beam beneath the entrance. Claire followed his gaze. A steel retaining pin sat slightly out of alignment, its surface marked by a thin line of fresh rust. "The bridge needs to be checked," she said. Reed glanced at the structure. "It passed inspection this morning." "Check it again." Tyler laughed from the far side. "Or admit he is afraid of lumber." Dakota did not react to the laughter. He shifted his weight backward and planted all 4 hooves. Reed walked closer, irritation tightening his voice. "This course depends on riders maintaining control. If you cannot get him across, step aside." Claire crouched near the bridge without releasing Dakota's lead. She pressed 2 fingers against the first support post and felt a faint vibration when another horse moved across the upper section. "The right pin is carrying too much load," she said. Reed looked toward Walter Hayes, who had followed them from the lower field. Walter's expression had changed. He stepped beneath the side rail, bent down, and reached toward the metal joint. Before his hand touched it, a sharp click sounded inside the frame. The retaining pin slipped nearly an inch from its housing. Reed immediately ordered everyone away. Tyler guided his gelding backward, just as the first 2 planks tilted. The bridge did not collapse, but one corner dropped several inches and locked against the emergency chain. Dust rose from the trench below. No one laughed. Walter removed the damaged pin and held it up. A narrow fracture ran through the center, almost invisible beneath the rust. "Another horse crossing at speed could have finished it," he said. Reed stared at the metal, then at Dakota. The Mustang stood exactly where he had stopped, calm and unmoving. Claire ran her hand along his neck. "Good choice," she whispered. Tyler dismounted and examined the shifted planks, the color gone from his face. "How did he know?" he asked. Claire looked toward the bridge. "He listened before we did." Reed seemed ready to respond, but Colonel Elias Ward had arrived at the upper rail during the commotion. He watched Claire and Dakota for several silent seconds before asking, "Where did you teach a horse to read structural stress?" Claire met his eyes. "I did not teach him that." Ward looked at the old scar along Dakota's shoulder. "Then where did he learn?" Claire gathered the lead rope and turned away from the damaged bridge. "Some places make careful listeners out of anyone who survives them." Sergeant Reed announced the afternoon assessment less than an hour after the damaged bridge had been closed. His voice carried across the staging area with the crisp certainty of someone determined to restore control. Each team would complete a 3-mile search route through the western training sector, locate a volunteer posing as a missing hiker, and return before the 40-minute limit expired. The course included steep grades, narrow timber passages, recorded engine noise, and controlled smoke. Speed would count heavily. Reed read the pairings from his clipboard, pausing when he reached the final names. "Boone and Whitaker." Tyler looked up sharply. "Sergeant, I already have a partner." "Not anymore." Reed pointed toward Dakota. "You wanted to see whether the Mustang belongs here. Now you can find out from the saddle beside him." A few trainees exchanged amused looks. Claire checked the leather strap beneath Dakota's chest without reacting. Tyler walked over with his bay gelding and lowered his voice. "Do not slow me down. I need the highest score in this class." Claire ran 2 fingers beneath Dakota's bridle to make sure nothing pinched. "Then stop thinking about the score." Tyler stared at her. "That is the point of the exercise. Finding the missing person is the point." Reed gathered the teams at the western gate and explained the route. Orange markers showed the approved trail. Each pair would carry a radio, a first aid pack, and a location card. Leaving the marked course meant immediate disqualification. Claire studied the map for only a few seconds before folding it. She looked beyond the gate toward the foothills, where afternoon wind bent the grass in uneven waves. Dakota lifted his head and drew in the air. The first teams departed at 2-minute intervals. When Claire and Tyler reached the starting line, Reed stepped close enough for only them to hear. The bridge incident does not make you an expert, Whitaker. Follow the markers, obey Boone's pace, and do not improvise. Claire mounted Dakota in one smooth motion. Understood. Reed dropped his hand. Tyler urged his gelding forward at once. Dakota followed at a measured canter, conserving his stride while the younger horse spent energy climbing the first grade. Tyler glanced back twice, irritated that Claire remained 20 feet behind. Keep up. He is keeping up. At the first narrow passage, Tyler's gelding reached it breathing hard. Dakota arrived steady, his ears moving between the timber walls and the distant speakers. A burst of recorded engine noise rolled across the course. Several horses farther ahead became restless. Dakota shortened his stride but did not break rhythm. Claire touched his neck once. They moved through the sound as though it were weather. Tyler stopped smiling. Halfway up the second ridge, they found the first orange marker, lying flat in the grass. Tyler pointed left. The trail continues there. Claire looked right toward a stand of cottonwoods. No, the wind turned it. The map says left. The ground says right. She showed him a line of fresh hoofprints and a shallow boot mark near the trees. Tyler checked his watch. We do not have time for this. Claire looked toward the quiet slope, then at Dakota. The Mustang's ears had fixed on something beyond the cottonwoods. Someone is out there, she said. Tyler heard nothing. Reed's voice crackled over the radio, ordering all teams to remain on the marked route. Claire did not answer immediately. Dakota took one step toward the trees on his own. Tyler tightened his reins. If we leave the course, we fail. Claire turned Dakota toward the unmarked ground. Then we fail for the right reason. Claire guided Dakota between the cottonwoods while Tyler followed with visible reluctance. The marked trail disappeared behind them within seconds, replaced by uneven ground covered in dry leaves and low brush. Reed's voice returned over the radio, sharper this time. Whitaker, Boone, report your position. Tyler reached for the handset, but Claire raised one hand and listened. Beneath the wind, beneath the creak of saddle leather, a faint sound drifted from farther down the slope. 3 short whistles. A pause, then 2 more. Dakota heard it too. His ears turned forward, and his steps became careful. Possible distress signal east of the route, Claire said into the radio. We are checking it. Negative, Reed answered. Return to the marked course immediately. The missing hiker is part of the exercise. Claire looked toward the narrow ravine ahead. This is not the volunteer. Static filled the radio for half a second. You cannot know that. The exercise signal is one long whistle every 30 seconds. This person is using groups of 3. Tyler stared at her. How do you know the signal pattern? Claire did not answer. Dakota moved down the slope without being urged, placing each hoof where the ground held firm. Tyler's gelding struggled to match his pace on the loose soil. They reached the edge of a shallow wash and found a young course technician sitting beside a damaged smoke unit. One boot was trapped beneath a lightweight equipment frame that had tipped into the brush. He was shaken but conscious, waving a bright orange whistle. The machine activated early, he called. My radio fell down there. Tyler dismounted and rushed toward him, but Claire's voice stopped him. Do not lift the frame yet. She studied the slope above them. The soil had been loosened by repeated training runs, and several rocks rested against a cracked wooden barrier. Moving the frame carelessly could shift the barrier and send debris into the wash. Claire directed Tyler to secure his gelding behind a tree, then asked him to take the coiled rope from his pack. She looped one end around the equipment frame and handed the other to him. Hold steady. Do not pull until I tell you. She positioned Dakota several feet uphill and attached the rope to a reinforced ring on his saddle. The Mustang stood square, calm beneath the tension. Claire crouched near the technician and cleared loose branches from around the trapped boot. Can you move your toes? She asked. Yes. Good. Keep your legs still. Reed's voice came through the radio again, but Claire said it beside her without replying. She checked the angle of the frame, then gave Dakota a low command. The Mustang leaned forward with controlled pressure, moving the equipment only an inch. Claire adjusted the technician's boot, signaled again, and Dakota shifted the frame just enough for Tyler to pull the young man free. No sudden movement, no panic, only quiet precision. The technician stood with Tyler's help and tested his weight carefully. "I thought nobody heard me," he said. Claire looked at Dakota. He did. The smoke unit released an unexpected burst behind them. Tyler's gelding startled, pulled loose from the tree, and bolted toward the upper trail. Tyler called after it and ran without thinking. The horse disappeared through the trees. A second later, the ground ahead gave way beneath Tyler's feet, and he slid down the loose bank toward the ravine. Claire mounted Dakota before Reed could finish asking what had happened. "Stay with the technician," she ordered. Then she turned the Mustang toward the falling dust. "We are not done yet." Tyler disappeared below the edge of the wash, but Claire could still hear loose stones moving beneath him. Dakota reached the slope and stopped before the ground became unstable. Claire leaned forward, studying the narrow cuts where runoff had carved channels through the dirt. "Tyler, do not climb," she called. His answer came from about 20 feet below. "I am fine. I can get back up." "Stay where you are." A moment later, a section of soil broke loose beneath his boot and slid farther into the ravine. Tyler pressed himself against a ledge no wider than a saddle blanket. The confidence had left his voice. "I cannot find solid ground." Claire removed the rope from Dakota's saddle and tied one end around the reinforced ring. Reed's voice came through the radio from her jacket. "Whitaker, hold position. A recovery team is moving toward you." Claire looked toward the western ridge. Even at full speed, the team would need several minutes to reach the wash. Above Tyler, the cracked barrier shifted against the loose rocks. "He does not have several minutes," she said. "That is an order. Do not enter the ravine." Claire clipped the radio back to her jacket. "Then record that I heard you." Dakota stood at the upper edge with his weight balanced over all four legs. Claire touched his shoulder and pointed toward a strip of firmer earth running diagonally across the slope. The Mustang lowered his head, tested the first step, and began descending sideways. He did not rush. Each hoof settled before the next one moved. Claire stayed close to his uphill side, using the saddle for balance while feeding the rope through her hands. Tyler watched them approach with disbelief. "You are bringing the horse down here?" "He is bringing the rope." Dakota reached a flat shelf about 10 feet above Tyler and stopped without being asked. Claire secured the line around her waist and moved the remaining distance on foot. She kept her body low and her steps short. When she reached Tyler, she checked his arms and legs before attaching the rope around his chest. "Can you stand?" "I think so." "Thinking is not enough. Tell me what moves." Tyler flexed both feet and lifted one knee. "Everything moves." "Good. Follow my steps exactly." She signaled Dakota with a soft click of her tongue. The Mustang leaned into the line and held steady tension as Claire guided Tyler upward. Halfway to the shelf, Tyler looked down and froze. Claire placed one hand against his shoulder. "Do not look at the distance. Look at the next 6 inches." He drew a slow breath and moved one foot, then another. Dakota adjusted his position each time the rope changed angle, keeping the pull even. When Tyler finally reached the shelf, he rested one hand against the Mustang's neck. Dakota did not move away. "Thank you," Tyler whispered. Claire untied the rope and checked the slope above them. "Save it until we are back." The cracked barrier gave a low, wooden groan. Dakota's ears turned sharply uphill. Claire mounted, reached down, and pulled Tyler behind her. "Hold the saddle, not me." Dakota climbed the diagonal path with steady power, carrying both riders through the drifting dust. At the top, the course technician and 2 arriving trainers stood in silence. Reed reached them moments later, anger ready on his face, but it faded when he saw Tyler safely seated behind Claire. "You ignored a direct order," he said. Claire dismounted and helped Tyler down. "Yes." Reed looked toward the ravine, then at Dakota's dust-covered legs. "Why?" Claire loosened the rope from the saddle ring. "Because he was still out there." The recovery team escorted the course technician back toward the staging area, while Tyler walked beside Claire and Dakota in silence. Reed remained several steps behind them, carrying the radio he had nearly crushed in his hand. No one mentioned the unfinished assessment. The stopwatch no longer mattered. By the time they reached the western gate, word of the incident had already spread across the range. Riders had gathered near the rail, some still mounted, others holding reins loosely as they watched Claire approach with dust on her jacket and Dakota breathing steadily beneath the afternoon sun. Colonel Elias Ward stood on the observation platform with Walter Hayes beside him. Ward's attention moved first to Tyler, then to the technician, and finally to Claire. "Bring them through the center lane," he ordered. Reed looked toward the closed route. "Sir, the center lane has not been cleared since the barrier malfunction." "Then clear it now." Staff members opened the lower gate and removed the lightweight markers from the path. Claire mounted Dakota again, only because the Mustang had to be returned to the stable side of the course. Tyler offered to lead him instead. Claire shook her head. "He brought us this far." Dakota stepped into the lane at a walk. The range had become unusually quiet. Even the trainees who had laughed that morning now watched the Mustang place each hoof with careful certainty. Near the final obstacle, a section of practice fencing had shifted when the emergency crew passed through. One bent steel hook protruded from the upper rail, hidden beneath a loose canvas strip. Dakota saw the canvas move and angled away, but another horse behind him pressed too close. Claire guided Dakota forward to keep the line from bunching together. The hook caught the right sleeve of her field jacket. Fabric tightened against her arm. Claire turned, but the horse behind them shifted again, and the sleeve tore from elbow to shoulder with a dry, sudden sound. Dakota stopped instantly. Claire reached for the damaged cloth, yet the mark beneath it was already visible. A black horseshoe crossed by a narrow silver wing rested high on her upper arm. Beneath it, faded but unmistakable, were the characters GS7. Walter Hayes drew in a quiet breath. Reed's clipboard slipped against his leg. On the platform, Colonel Ward's face changed before anyone else understood what they were seeing. His binoculars fell from his hand and struck the wooden floor. "Shut down the range," he said. The nearest instructor hesitated. Ward raised his voice. "Shut down the entire range." Engines were switched off. Training speakers went silent. Riders stopped where they stood. In the sudden stillness, the only sound was Dakota's slow breathing and the loose canvas tapping against the rail. Claire pulled the torn sleeve across the mark, but Ward was already descending the platform steps. He crossed the packed dirt without looking away from her. When he reached Dakota, the Mustang moved half a step closer to Claire, placing his shoulder between her and the approaching colonel. Ward stopped. His eyes went from the symbol on Claire's arm to the pale scar along Dakota's left shoulder. "Ghost Spur," he said, barely above a whisper. Claire's expression did not change. Reed looked between them. "Sir, what is Ghost Spur?" Ward ignored the question. "Where did you get that mark?" Claire rested one hand against Dakota's mane. "From people who are not here to explain it." Ward's jaw tightened. "Ghost Spur 7 disappeared 12 years ago." Claire met his eyes. "That is what the report said." The colonel seemed to forget the dozens of people listening. No one was supposed to come back. Dakota released a long breath. Claire looked down at the Mustang, then back at Ward. "Reports have been wrong before." Reed stared at the faded mark as though the letters might rearrange themselves into something less impossible. "She could have worked with the unit," he said. "Logistics, veterinary support, civilian transport. People keep symbols from teams they served beside." Colonel Ward did not take his eyes from Claire. "Support personnel did not carry the number 7. The words moved across the silent range with more weight than a shouted command. Walter Hayes stepped closer, but kept a respectful distance from Dakota. The Mustang watched him carefully, one ear turned toward Claire. Ward pointed to the narrow silver wing crossing the black horseshoe. Every member of Ghost Spur carried the horseshoe. Only field leaders carried the wing. The number identified the final active team. Tyler stood near the rail, still covered in dust from the ravine. He looked at Claire as if seeing a stranger wearing the face of the woman who had guided him 6 inches at a time towards solid ground. "What happened to them?" he asked. Ward's attention shifted toward the scar on Dakota's shoulder. It was pale, slightly curved, and almost hidden beneath the dark mane. "That mark is not random either." Claire's hand moved over the scar before she see. Before anyone could ask another question, a sharp gust swept across the range and tore the loose canvas free from the damaged fence. The fabric snapped above the horses like a sail caught in a storm. Tyler's bay gelding startled first. It pulled away from the trainee holding its reins, turned toward the closed center lane, and began circling faster as the canvas dragged behind it. The other horses grew restless, pressing against the rail and crowding their handlers. Reed stepped forward and raised his voice, but the command only added another sound to the confusion. Claire moved before anyone reached for her. "Everyone stop talking," she said. Her voice was quiet, yet Ward immediately lifted one hand, and the instructors fell silent. Claire mounted Dakota without using the stirrup. She did not chase the frightened gelding. Instead, she guided the Mustang into a wide arc nearly 30 feet away, matching the other horse's direction while keeping a careful distance. Dakota lowered his head and shortened his stride. Claire loosened the reins until they rested almost entirely against his neck. Tyler watched from beside the fence. "What is she doing?" Walter Hayes answered without looking away. "Giving the horse somewhere safe to go." Claire and Dakota completed one slow circle, then another. Each time the gelding passed them, Dakota moved a few feet closer, never blocking its path and never forcing it to turn. Claire shifted her weight, barely moving her hands. The Mustang responded with such precision that he seemed to understand the shape she wanted before she asked for it. The frightened horse began matching Dakota's rhythm. Its hurried steps became longer and more even. Claire reduced the circle again. Dakota breathed out, low and steady, and the gelding lowered its head for the first time. Ward stared at the pattern forming in the dirt. 2 sets of hoofprints curved inward like the lines of a spiral. "Northwind," he whispered. Reed looked at him. "The call sign?" "The method," Ward pointed toward the horses. Ghost Spur used it when noise, weather, or unfamiliar ground caused a mount to lose focus. No ropes, no pressure. One calm horse created a moving boundary until the other remembered how to listen. Claire guided Dakota across the gelding's path at a walk. The bay horse stopped behind him, sides rising and falling, but no longer trying to escape. She dismounted and approached from the shoulder, keeping her movements visible. Her hand rested lightly against its neck until the breathing slowed. Then she removed the canvas, caught around the rear strap, and passed the reins to Tyler. "Do not punish him for being afraid," she said. "He warned you before he ran." Tyler took the reins with both hands. "I did not notice." "That is why you listen earlier next time." Reed glanced at the spiral tracks, then at Claire's torn sleeve. Doubt had vanished from his expression. Ward stepped into the center lane and faced the assembled trainees. "You wanted proof that the mark was real," he said. "You just watched a procedure that has not appeared in any public training manual for 12 years. Claire turned Dakota toward the stable gate. Ward called after her. "Northwind, wait." She stopped but did not look back. The colonel's voice softened. "White Ridge was not a failed mission. 31 people came home because your team stayed." Claire's hand tightened around Dakota's reins. 31 was not everyone. The range remained silent as the Mustang touched his muzzle to her shoulder, reminding her that memory was not the same as standing alone. Claire remained beside Dakota at the stable gate, while the afternoon wind moved dust across the empty center lane. Colonel Ward approached slowly, leaving several feet between himself and the Mustang. He no longer carried the posture of an officer questioning a civilian. He stood like a man facing a memory that had waited 12 years to answer him. "I heard only 11 seconds of your final transmission," he said. "I have wondered about the rest ever since." Claire looked toward the distant foothills. For a moment, the brown Colorado ridges disappeared behind another mountain range, one covered in snow and hidden beneath a white sky. White Ridge had begun with 7 riders, 7 Mustangs, and a request to locate 6 missing survey workers before a winter storm closed the northern pass. By sunset, the mission had changed. A medical convoy had lost its route in the same valley, and families from a nearby outpost were moving toward the mountains with nowhere else to go. Ghost Spur 7 found them scattered across nearly 8 miles of frozen ground. The radio signal weakened with every mile. Aircraft could not descend through the cloud cover. Trucks could not cross the narrow trail. Only the Mustangs kept moving. Claire remembered leather stiff with ice, lanterns swinging beneath heavy coats, and Dakota testing each drift before placing his weight. The team divided food, blankets, and spare gear among the evacuees. They placed children and exhausted travelers in the saddles, then walked beside the horses to keep the animals balanced. The northern pass was supposed to stay open until midnight, Claire said. Her voice remained controlled, but her hand rested against Dakota's shoulder. "It started closing before 9. Ward listened without interrupting. Claire explained how falling snow erased the trail behind them and covered the markers ahead. Ghost Spur formed a moving line through the pass, one rider every 100 yards, guiding groups toward the shelter on the other side. Dakota carried a portable radio unit when the main equipment failed. For 43 minutes, Claire's team kept the route visible using lamps, whistles, and the steady movement of horses trained to follow one another through darkness. One by one, the evacuees reached the final descent. The last medical group crossed just before the upper trail vanished beneath snow and broken timber. "Why did your team not follow them?" Tyler asked from several yards away. Claire looked at him. "Because the final group still believed 2 people were missing." Reed lowered his gaze. No one spoke as Claire described, turning Ghost Spur back toward the ridge. The storm separated the riders, signals became distant, then disappeared. Dakota lost his saddle blanket, but refused to leave the trail. Claire remembered calling each team member by name and hearing fewer answers every time. Near dawn, the radio stopped completely. Her last clear memory was fastening the identification tags from the empty saddles to Dakota's gear and releasing his reins. "I told him to go to shelter," she said. Ward looked at the Mustang. "But he did not." Claire shook her head. Dakota had traveled downhill for nearly a mile, then turned around. He followed her footprints until the wind erased them, then followed her scent through the snow. Hours later, he found Claire beneath a stand of pine trees and remained beside her until she could stand. When she could not walk farther, he carried her. "That scar on his shoulder," Walter said softly. Claire's fingers traced the pale curve. A piece of the radio frame caught him during the descent. He never stopped. The range was silent again, but this silence felt different. It was no longer shock. It was understanding. Ward removed his cap and held it against his chest. "You saved 31 people." Claire looked at the empty saddles that existed only in her memory. "We were sent for 6. Dakota pressed his forehead against her shoulder. Claire closed her eyes, and for one quiet second, the mountain finally released its hold on her. Colonel Ward waited until Claire opened her eyes before asking the question that no one else was willing to speak aloud. "How many members of Ghost Spur 7 came back from White Ridge?" The wind moved through the stable gate and carried the faint scent of pine from the foothills. Claire kept one hand against Dakota's neck. The Mustang stood close enough that their shadows touched on the ground. "1 human," she said. The answer settled over the range. Tyler removed his cap. Walter Hayes lowered his head. Sergeant Reed stared at the dirt near his boots, remembering every impatient order, every doubtful glance, and every time he had treated Claire and Dakota as though they were taking up space meant for someone better qualified. Ward looked at the Mustang again. Claire felt Dakota's breath against her sleeve and added, "But 2 of us left the mountain." No one moved. The words did not sound like a claim of victory. They sounded like the truth she had carried alone for 12 years. Tyler stepped forward first. He stopped several feet away, giving Dakota room, then held Claire's gaze. "I called you the stable girl," he said. "I laughed at him because he was a Mustang. Then both of you came back for me when you could have followed the course and protected your score." Claire looked toward the western ridge where the orange markers still traced the approved path. "A score cannot tell you who is missing." Tyler swallowed. "I was wrong." Claire nodded once, then learned from it. Reed approached next, his clipboard no longer tucked beneath his arm. He held it at his side as if it had become something unnecessary. "I gave you an order to stay on the route," he said. "You ignored it?" "Yes. And if you had obeyed, the technician would have remained trapped, and Boone would have been alone in the ravine." Claire said nothing. Reed looked at Dakota, then at the spiral hoofprints still visible in the center lane. "I believe discipline meant following the plan exactly." "Discipline means remembering why the plan exists," Claire replied. Ward watched the trainees listening behind him. "And why does it exist?" Claire turned toward the range. "To bring people home." Her voice was quiet, but every person heard it. "Training, rank, and skill do not make anyone more important than the person beside them. They make your responsibility heavier. The moment you use experience as permission to look down on someone, you have forgotten what experience was supposed to teach you." Tyler rested one hand gently against his gelding's neck. The animal was calm now, standing near Dakota without fear. "How do we know who is strong enough?" he asked. Claire looked at the young rider, then at the Mustang who had once turned back into a storm, when every instinct should have carried him toward shelter. "Do not ask who looks strongest when the field is quiet," she said. "Watch who stays when leaving would be easier." Colonel Ward placed his cap back on his head, straightened his shoulders, and raised his hand in a formal salute. Walter followed, then Reed. One by one, instructors and trainees across the range stood upright and did the same. Claire did not return the salute. She lowered her forehead to Dakota's for a moment and whispered, "They remember now." The Mustang released a slow breath, and the sound moved through the silence like an answer. The salute ended only when Claire lifted one hand and gently lowered Colonel Ward's arm. "You do not owe me a ceremony," she said. "The people who stayed on White Ridge never asked for one." Ward studied her for a moment, then nodded. The range slowly came back to life, but the sound was different now. No one shouted over the horses. No one laughed when Dakota passed. Reed ordered the damaged bridge closed until every support, pin, and plank could be inspected. He also removed the afternoon scores from the board. "Today was not a race," he told the trainees. "It was a lesson in what we failed to notice." Before sunset, Ward asked Claire to meet him beside the administration barn. He carried a sealed folder that had been removed from the base archive. Inside were the remaining records of Ghost Spur 7, along with a formal request to restore Claire's rank and recognize Dakota as the final surviving service mount of the unit. "There can be a ceremony within the month," Ward said. "Your name can be returned to the record." Claire did not open the folder. She watched Dakota grazing near the fence, his dark mane moving in the evening wind. "Return the names of all 7 riders," she said. "And all 7 horses." Ward placed the folder beneath his arm. "I can do that." "Then that is enough." She asked for one more change. Mustangs would no longer be dismissed from mounted training because they lacked polished bloodlines or formal service histories. Every horse would be judged by steadiness, awareness, trust, and the willingness to carry a partner home. Ward agreed before she finished speaking. 3 weeks later, a new brass plaque appeared at the entrance to the western course. It carried 14 names beneath a simple black horseshoe crossed by a silver wing. Dakota's name was the last one listed, but trainees often stopped there the longest. Tyler became the first student assigned to help revise the course safety procedures. He learned to check the ground before the clock, the horse before the score, and the quiet person before assuming there was nothing to hear. Reed began every new class beside the repaired bridge. He never mentioned Claire's rank. He told the students only that the structure still stood because a Mustang had listened when trained people did not. Claire stayed long enough to complete the course, though no one tried to grade her again. On her final morning, she loaded her gear into the old trailer before sunrise. Tyler, Walter, Reed, and Ward stood near the gate. There were no speeches. Claire led Dakota toward the ramp, but the Mustang paused and looked back across the range. The first light touched the foothills, turning the dust gold. Ward raised his hand once, not as a formal salute, but as a quiet farewell. Claire returned the gesture. Then Dakota stepped into the trailer. As the pickup moved through the east gate, the plaque at the western course caught the rising sun. Claire had never asked Fort Redstone to remember her name. She had only asked them to remember what silence could carry, what loyalty could survive, and why no one should be measured by appearance when the true test had not yet begun.